When you look at this number, when you look at 26%, don't forget that if these folks are actually leaving your brand, they're probably not leaving alone, right?
Right.
They have the X's or the Facebooks and all the other social media to go and create hype about it as well, saying, you know what, I'm not using this brand anymore. And think about the multiplier effect that something like that has.
Hader Iqbal is Director of Product Marketing at Thales. And I'm going to ask Hader to give us a better description of what Thales does because they operate in a space that we are all familiar with on some level, but may not be familiar with this particular function. But first of all, Hader, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Mike. And yeah, so Thales is, I mean, the way I love to describe it to a lot of the people is in tangible terms. So the best way to look at it is what we say is if you open up your wallet or if you open up your phone, it's highly likely that you're already using one of our digital identity and security products. And that could potentially be, for instance, the credit card, the chip-based credit card that you guys are using, or perhaps the SIM card or the eSIM that you might be using. Or perhaps, depending on the state that you're in the US or in other parts of the world as well, the driver's license that you might be using. So we are actually in multiple domains, if you will, where we represent different digital identity products and solutions. But myself, I actually represent a specific uh, business line within Thales, which is the identity and access management business line, which is basically helping a lot of the organizations with their digital transformation journeys in terms of implementing digital identity for their different kind of user bases.
Would that be internal and external users or mostly external customers?
Both actually.
Interesting. That's got to be an interesting remit because, um, having spoken to, countless people about their own digital transformation journeys, uh, there's the technology side of it, which can have its own significant complexities, but oftentimes the bigger hurdles tend to be cultural in nature. And so if that's the job description you have, fortunately or unfortunately, I think it would be really interesting to talk about how you and Thales go about implementing those kinds of transformations. Because I know firsthand and lots secondhand that it's not easy.
Absolutely. And I think when you look at it from our own point of view as well, right? When we speak about digital transformation, it's not just helping our customers actually transition on their journey of their digital transformation, but we ourselves obviously are going through a similar transformation as well. So a lot of the products that I just described in front of you are actually physical, tangible products, right? So when you speak about a SIM card, for instance, it's that plasticky thing that you actually put inside your phone, or your banking card, for instance, it's plastic as well, even though it has that chip inside, or your passport, so on and so forth. But increasingly, what you see is, um, all these type of digital identity documents, which were actually your gateway to the digital world, whether that's your mobile network operator, whether that's your bank, whether those are your government services. A lot of these identity documents are getting dematerialized as well and becoming digital as well. So you've transitioned from a physical SIM card into what's called an eSIM or an
Mhm.
embedded SIM, which you don't really need to physically insert inside your phone. When you're speaking about banks, for instance, obviously digital banking is like a norm now, right? You don't need to physically go to a bank necessarily for physically doing a transaction, nor actually use your plastic card to actually do a transaction as well. So I guess when we speak about digital transformation, it's not just helping our customers, whether those are banks, whether those are manufacturing companies or telecom companies. It's not just helping them with their digital transformation as well. We ourselves actually understand a lot of those cultural aspects that you alluded to, right? As we are transforming ourselves from being a very product centric and an engineering centric organization to a much more digital organization as well.
Interesting. That's probably a whole nother conversation that would be worthy, I'm sure. But I wanted to talk a little bit today about the Consumer Digital Trust Index that Thales just came out with, and some of the more eye-opening findings there. Just for context and transparency, for that matter, we wrapped up a pretty significant project for on this same topic recently, probably about a month ago, and there were a handful of things, data points that were really eye-opening to us as we worked on this. And part of that was, I guess for me, most significantly was the level of unawareness that so many consumers had as to their own risks. But for those people who were aware on some level, how important those risks became. And looking through some of the data in this report, it looks like some of that's supportive, but it's expanded well beyond that. So um, I would like to, if it's okay with you, kind of just go high level on a few things, and then we can go nice and deep on where this data comes from and what it might mean out in the real world.
Yeah, sure, that
Um,
works.
so I think everybody in banking, healthcare, and government services will be happy to see that their verticals are the most trusted sectors when it comes to sharing personal data. Um, I Speaking with a handful of people in banking and healthcare, I don't think there's any surprises. Government services, the handful of folks I know who work in that sector might be surprised to know that they're that well favored and trusted there, but good for them. And then media, entertainment, social media, and logistics are languishing at the bottom of the industry. No real surprises on media and entertainment and social media there, but logistics was a bit of a surprise. Any insights there?
Yeah, I think I mean even for the ones who are actually leading the pack as well, right? I know some of these findings they might seem really obvious, even with the government side as well. Even though you might have very differing points of view. I think when you look at these industries in general, and you look at the ones at the top and at the bottom and how regulated the ones at the top are as opposed to the ones at the bottom, I think that's kind of like a litmus test for me at least to see that with that regulation, I think at the end of the day the customers do have better faith in the brands in those industries. But yeah, I mean, for logistics, I think sometimes it can be a perception issue as well, in terms of how a lot of the customers are interpreting logistics. So, logistics could potentially be looked at as a courier service, as opposed to a logistics firm that's actually basically kind of like a trucking company
Right.
as well, right? So I think part of that could be the reason for that as well. But again, going back to that regulation aspect, right? When you speak about logistics, even though logistic companies as a whole, when you look at them and their digital transformation journey, they do a lot in terms of internal aspects of digital transformation, like improving their operational efficiency, for instance, better collaboration with other vendors, other partners, distributors, so on and so forth. But as opposed to that, when you look at it from the consumer point of view, perhaps that has not been their forte in terms of making sure that their consumers who might be accessing their applications or their services digitally now actually require a better service. I think that could partly chip into why we see these statistics.
Sure. And I would suspect that at least a portion of it is might be due to the fact that, there are some of those logistics providers in this case who are probably doing a great job, but it's likely the consumer just isn't quite aware of it to that level because a logistics company, almost by definition, is not really a consumer-facing company.
Yeah, that's true. And in fact, and you brought a very pertinent point, right? Because when we speak about digital trust or digital experiences, we you mentioned this in the beginning of the call, whether we spoke about just the workforce side or the consumer side. There's this whole realm of what we refer to as the B2B identities as well. And this is basically your suppliers, your partners, your distributors, or when you look at insurance, for example, your brokers, your agents. so on and so forth. And this is like a totally different realm altogether.
FinFair Connect drives incrementality to data-driven loyalty platforms. With over 15 million consumers using their services, they're one of the leading personalized offers platform in the UK, US, and Australia, providing a one-stop solution for open banking, card-linked, affiliate offers, and gift cards. As part of FinFair Inc., which provides modern expense management solutions to SMBs, FinFair Connect is literally transforming the payment-linked offer space by creating full, self-service, white-label portals for advertisers and publishers, thus enabling advertisers to reach hundreds of publishers via one portal, saving time and, of course, money. Check them out at connect.finfair.com. Let's get back to some of the data points because I think they're pretty eye-opening. 87% expect privacy rights from online companies they interact with. And the biggest expectation is the right to be informed that their personal data is being collected, followed closely by the right to have their personal data erased. And that's 55% want to be informed that it's being collected, and 53% want to be informed that they can have the right to erase their data. Interesting, yes, but I thought what was missing here was, and perhaps it's just my own personal perspective, but that their data is being sold, which, you can't do it quite so overtly as you could 5 or 10 years ago, but there are lots of ways of spreading that data around the B2B ecosystem that aren't quite a direct sale. But that, again, that might just be my perspective. But did either of those statistics surprise you? One, and were there any say vertical variances when you were looking at different industries, how that might have looked?
Yeah, I think first of all, yes, pleasantly surprised, I should say, to look at this statistic, primarily because usually when we're speaking to some of our customers, it's a hard sell to help them understand that what your customers are actually becoming a lot more aware about their privacy rights, right?
Completely.
You spoke about the data that companies hold on a lot of these consumers today. Yes, maybe 10 years ago, it was not under that much of a spotlight, but now, when you look at it, even from a consumer point of view, and clearly, as the stats show from this survey as well, consumers are a lot more aware in terms of what their rights might be. So yeah, I mean, pleasantly surprised, first of all, to look at that as well. But having said that, I think it doesn't necessarily mean that organizations need to stop collecting data about consumers as well. What this essentially means is that they actually need to do it a lot more responsibly, and not just because the regulation is demanding it. So you have regulations popping up over here in the US, for instance. I think there's probably more than 30 different regulations in different states
Yeah.
already, right? That's like becoming a whole mesh, if you will. But then I think a lot of the organizations, they need to look at it from a more responsible angle, not just from a compliance angle, but
Completely
something
agree.
that they actually owe to their consumers anyway.
Yeah, there are certainly those companies that have kind of taken that proactive, I would just call it mature stance on their consumer data. But again, just because we see this from where we sit in our corner of the universe, there are still a lot of companies out there who are obeying the regulations just because they're regulated.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to the second part of your question as well. If we see any nuances in the data in different verticals as well, right? And I think that's where you see that split all over again as well, where the more regulated industries, and they're regulated for a reason, right? Because they're holding the more sensitive data,
Sure.
or the PII, if you will, for a lot of their consumers as well. So it actually makes sense that way as well, that consumers would actually expect those kind of industries or those kind of brands to be a lot more responsible with their data, of course.
This is one this next data point is one that I think we should just spend the rest of the conversation on because it's wild to me. Over a quarter, 26% of consumers have abandoned a brand in the past 12 months due to privacy concerns. And if I may, a couple things I want to pull out there. Um, One is that if I and all of the apps on my phone and my computer and whatever else in my digital life, if I suspect some sort of uh, data immaturity, call it insensitivity, I'm out. I'll delete them so fast and I'll tell everybody who listens to me, both of them, that it's like you really need to deal with this. And that's just me. I tend to respond pretty quickly to those kinds of things. Um, but your average consumer probably doesn't see things the way I do, just because of what I do for a living. Nonetheless, 26% of consumers not would have abandoned a brand in the past 12 months due to privacy concerns. And I think that for anyone who is engaged in any of the disciplines that exist to build customer retention, and I'm thinking of CX, the broader customer experience and employee experience, and even customer loyalty disciplines, this statistic should be a really scary one to me.
Absolutely. And I think when you look at this number, when you look at 26%, don't forget that if these folks are actually leaving your brand, they're probably not leaving alone, right?
Right.
Um, they have the X's or the Facebooks and all the other social media to go and create hype about it as well, saying, you know what, I'm not using this brand anymore. And think about the multiplier effect that something like that has.
Right.
Um, and again, it's kind of sad in some ways, but then at the same time, it's one of those told you so moments, right? Because with cybersecurity companies like ours, um, unfortunately, we have to resort to fear mongering tactics in terms of trying to educate enterprises, large organizations to actually be careful about the privacy or the security of their consumers or their users' data, right? But these kind of stats are really telling that way. So now what we're saying is, and we started this conversation with a cultural shift as well. I think from a privacy point of view as well, especially for those CX people, they need to understand that they need to bake in privacy into their products, right? So something that we like to refer to as privacy by design. So I know it sounds like a really heavy term, but essentially what we're saying is, introduce those checkpoints in that user journey where you're ensuring that you have um, taken consent from the consumer to begin with, but then also at the same time making your consumers aware as well in terms of their rights at different checkpoints as well. You know that that option of going and turning off a certain notification should not be hidden so deep inside your menu somewhere where your consumer can't even go and access it, right? They should be able to go and update their settings or privacy settings very easily. Um, and not only is that going to help some of these companies in ensuring that they are compliant to a lot of those regulations, but then at the same time, they are gaining a trust of their users as part of that process as well. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I love that you the phrase you used, it should be really be baked in to all of their processes. Should it even be something that you call out? Maybe, but I think that kind of protection is an expectation, as the data clearly shows. So why not meet it? We would be remiss if we didn't talk about AI somehow in this conversation. However, your findings here were surprising to me anyway, that people have these definite feelings about what AI can mean and can do. And I'll just call out a few of them. Maybe we can talk about it for a few minutes. 57% are nervous that brands' use of generative AI will put their personal data at risk. Uh, Makes total sense, but well, I'll editorialize in a moment here. 43% said they wouldn't trust any interactions powered by generative AI. That's actually a really big deal. And I think the folks who are listening who operate in the CX space need to take note of that because so much of CX right now is being kind of migrated into an AI powered sphere. Um, and 47% don't trust companies that use generative AI responsibly. Like even if it's responsible, they don't trust it.
Mhm.
So is that a hype thing? Is that there really is something to fear here? What's your take?
But I think um, I want to be fair to the survey as well and the whole survey process, right? When we were coming up with this question as well, we already had this in the back of our minds that okay, we are actually asking this question of consumers who may not even know what generative AI actually is. Yes, they have heard about it, they know the hype, but they don't really know what it is at the back, and they don't know how it can potentially benefit them as well. So I'm going to put that caveat out there. However, we still put that question in there because perceptions do matter.
Oh, sure.
And this survey is basically all about perceptions as well, when you look at it. So I know a lot of the companies, they're joining the bandwagon, and they want to speak a lot more about how they're using generative AI in their digital services, not knowing that maybe it's actually inversely affecting them, not even knowing about this perception, right? So I don't think at the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily mean that these CX executives, for instance, or the IT teams, for instance, they should stop looking at generative AI. No, I don't think that's how we should be interpreting this. I think it's good to know what the audiences are perceiving in terms of how that technology is being used. And then obviously tailoring your user experiences and making sure how you're communicating about a certain technology or the use of data, of those users at the end of the day in a more responsible fashion. And I go back to the same point. I think don't underestimate the power of communicating with your customers in terms of how you are taking care of their data as well. So again, baking that privacy aspect has multiple notions to it as well. Making sure that you're communicating how you're preserving the privacy of those consumers. I think it plays to that trust equation, as I would call it, between those brands and those consumers.
Makes perfect sense. As well, what public perception and even call it the business public perception of AI is transforming weekly. I can remember not that long ago, literally, say, call it 2 months ago, when the sky was falling. AI was going to change and destroy the world, and in short order, take all our jobs, and yet, at least 2 months later, we're still here. But our perceptions and fears are shifting rapidly on this, and even within the business world, I think people are coming to the realization uh, that responsibly deployed, there are some fantastic efficiencies that can be had through generative AI or AI in general, and yet I think the public is left with, the non-business public, whoever they are, is left to interpret whatever the news cycle is delivering to them, and a lot of times that's angst and hype, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think um, so. When we did the survey, obviously we did it across 12 different countries, and interestingly, I'll give you one more data point as well. I think maybe around, if I remember correctly, around 37% of the respondents in Germany, they actually responded back that they actually see chatbots as kind of like a nuisance, right? So
Really?
we spoke about generative AI, and obviously chatbots is one area where generative AI has a lot of utility, right? Um, that's the interesting thing, right? So you have these nuances between different countries, for instance, between different industries. And I would say even within an industry, between different brands, there are nuances that you need to be aware of, right?
Sure.
Um, and that's why I think going back to doing a full circle, right? And on one side we're speaking about privacy, you still need data uh, from the consumers to actually understand them a bit better. You need data even to understand how they perceive your use of technology as well at the end of the day. But I think it's really important for CX managers to actually know this particular aspect, that they need to actually have that feedback loop in their processes and their products.
Yeah, a great point. Great point. I anecdotally, I think that's smart to say that, there are uh, geographic differences, there are cultural differences, there are, I'm sure, demographic differences in the way chatbots are used and perceived. I know I had an interaction recently with a fairly sophisticated entity here in the United States, and their chatbot popped up right away to answer a question as soon as it perceived I had one, which I thought, well, that's pretty neat and proactive. However, when I engaged with the chatbot only had one thing it wanted. It wanted to funnel me down this pipeline and deliver me into the lead flow, and there was nothing I could do about it. It had nothing to do with my inquiry or the problem. That's just where this chatbot wanted to take me, and it was a great example of a sophisticated company deploying a sophisticated technology without really looking at that feedback loop you just mentioned.
Yeah, and that's why, by the way, we started part of this conversation speaking about identity as well, and this is why identity becomes really, really core to the whole CX part, right? If Mike is using multiple insurance brands of the same group, for instance, maybe you're using the car insurance, the home insurance, and some other health insurance from the same organization, right? Do they have a singular view
Mm.
of Mike as a consumer, right? Because your preferences, yes, there might be nuances between those as well, but then they might actually cascade from one brand to the other as well. And that's why identity becomes so pivotal in building those personalized user experiences, which can wow or which can delight your consumers as well. Because if you actually center things around the identity of a user, you can understand them a lot better as well. And then you can make sure that you have a more persistent user experience if you have multiple brands across your group or across your organization as well. So yeah, I mean, I think I can't underestimate the importance of identity, and I think a lot of the banks, a lot of the telcos, a lot of the retail companies, they have started realizing this, which is why they're trying to make sure that whenever they're building that CX layer, on top of it is always this identity layer that goes with it, that goes hand in hand with it, just to make sure that they have a very good personalized view for each and every consumer out there.
It's too bad that this conversation isn't being published live, but we're not doing that for obvious reasons. But I would love to do an informal survey of how many people listening uh, have had an experience with a company that has both offline and online components, where the company actually had that 360-degree view of who you were within their system, within their ecosystem, their world. And you know, I think in the online world, it's probably more easier to manage that, but online/offline it becomes very difficult. And as you mentioned that, I'm trying to think of the number of companies that I've interacted with both online and offline presences that have my view somewhat coordinated, and there aren't very many of them at all. It's still something of a challenge for so many companies.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and again, it's not, what I'm about to what I'm about to say is not rigged in any way as well. It sort of seems to coincide with our study as well, which is when you look at banks, for instance, right? I think they've done a reasonably good job of building what you would call that omni-channel user experience for their consumers, right? And identity has actually been pivotal to that as well. Whether you're gaining access to your financial services from a mobile app, from the web, from maybe the ATM machine, or physically at the branch, right? This is essentially what that omni-channel experience is at the end of the day. And this is why, again, identity becomes pivotal because as you're actually entering that bank, for instance, and you're identifying yourself maybe by dipping in your card or tapping your phone somewhere, right? It's the same identity at the end of the day that you're actually leveraging when you're
Right.
sitting at home and doing a mobile banking transaction as well. So yeah, I mean, I think lots of learnings. I think uh, going back to the initial part of the survey as well. I'm sorry, just going to make this one last point over here is you saw that discrepancy between the banks and the logistics companies, right? Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that the logistics companies or the media companies have to mimic, point by point what a bank might be implementing inside their organizations. But there are definitely learnings
Yeah.
out there. So, one surprising statistic that I saw was, or response was multi-factor authentication. Like 81% of the respondents said that they want the brand to actually offer multi-factor authentication. And here we've been spending, I don't know, years, decades trying to convince our customers to actually deploy multi-factor authentication. I wish we'd actually done a survey like this, I don't know, 10 years ago, maybe.
Right, right.
Right?
Well, maybe your efforts are finally paid off because the world seems to have turned in your favor here.
Yeah. So yeah, I think absolutely crucial to look at these points as well because our consumers, our users are becoming a lot more literate as well. They're becoming a lot more tech savvy as well. They know about their privacy rights. They know the security mechanisms that are out there that help in preventing the breaches of their data. Not necessarily too concerned about a company having a breach, but certainly their own data, right? Um, so yeah, I think it's an important part of the whole trust equation that brands need to be aware of.